Well, what I'm looking at now is the terms of reference that we're actually trying to work through into 2012. The first thing we'd like to do is we'd like to gather and disseminate national strategies on the social dimension. This is also related to an obligation which was set in the Leuven Communiqué, where national systems are obliged to have a national strategy for the social dimension and indeed to set national targets. Now, this has been tried once before, particularly an analysis of national strategies, and the problem was that, as I said, there's a very different understanding of what the social dimension might be, and therefore what national strategy could be. And so there's another suggestion within the working group program where we say maybe it's an idea to set up something like a European observatory on the social dimension, which might provide help, for example, in trying to categorize initiatives so that common goals and measures can be easily identified. An example might be this kind of, I mean, this is just, you know, a sketch, but this would be the kind of things which one could look at. There are going to be policies which are aimed at either students themselves or prospective students. Maybe, for example, kids, as Michael was saying, who are still at school, who are in the secondary system, for example, who wants to try and encourage to make the decision to go into higher education. And there are going to be initiatives which are much more aimed at the providers, at the universities, for example. An example might be in many higher education systems, universities get an extra bonus if they get non-traditional students into their higher education institution. And then, of course, other differences will be there'll be specific measures inside higher education. There will be measures before entry to higher education. And there'll be such things as benchmarking initiatives where actual measures themselves are not defined, but benchmarks are defined to encourage universities to adopt the measures they think will be best to achieve those benchmarks. And then the other thing we're doing as well is we're supporting a standardized monitoring on a European level through the Bologna implementation report, which will be published in 2012. So what are the achievements until now? Well, I think I was at the last ministerial meeting in March this year, which took place in Budapest and Vienna. And I think it's interesting that many of the ministers there talked about the social dimension. I'm not saying they understood what they meant, but they mentioned it. And that is, of course, an opportunity for us, because that means there is an agenda that we can set. Another point is a bit more concrete. When was it now? 2009. Eurostat and Eurostudent produced a report which is on a lot of data on the social dimension, and we tried as much as we could to include every Bologna country. So at the time that was 46 countries, and we tried to include them all. Of course, some we cover better than others. I've also brought 2 copies with me, which I don't want to take home. They're very heavy, so anyone is quite welcome to pick up a copy. They're also available on the website. So that did help, however, I think, because it showed the ministers and it showed people involved in the Bologna process what we really might mean by the social dimension. Because there's one thing, there's a definition. Here we had to try and say, okay, what could it really mean? What are the kind of dimensions that we should be covering if we want to deal with this topic? So the next steps of the working group at the moment is they start really from an understanding that we still know too little about the policies countries are implementing, and more so, we know very little about how effective these policies are. And it's really not easy to measure effectiveness of such policies because, as the second Michael was saying, there's a lot of things happening in higher education at the same time. So if you see changes, is it to do with one particular policy, or is it to do with one that you're not looking at the moment? So it's very difficult at the moment to do any kind of sensible analyses. But still, if we're going to talk about supporting universities and supporting countries and exchanging ideas, and we need to look at how effective some of the policies might be. And as I said, countries have been obliged, according to the Leuven Communiqué, to set targets for their social dimension. Now, this is, I think, also not easy. And, of course, the working group is asking, well, is that possible, and how can we help the actors involved in that to set these targets? And I think, as I say, I think one of the ways we can help is this kind of thing of trying to develop some kind of topology to try and understand how we might kind of organize seemingly very different kind of measures. And this is the kind of area where I think in most cases you will be involved in your countries, and this is certainly an area where you need to help, because the social dimension is too difficult or too different to be able to really define it sensibly on a kind of an abstract European level, apart from, you know, very aggregate statistics which tell us something but leave a lot behind as well. Okay, and that's where I wanted to end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have time for 2 questions. Right, else, please, over there. Right, else.
Else van der Werf, Hans University Groningen of the Netherlands. You mentioned somewhere at the beginning of your speech that you thought that attention for the social dimension might lead to a competitive advantage for European universities as opposed to, I suppose, US and Asian universities. What do you base that on? Basically.
I don't know how I'm supposed to answer that. I don't base it on anything. I'm reporting one of the justifications which I think is being used. It was used, I think, in the Lisbon agenda. I think it is seen as one of the driving arguments behind the social dimension. And I think if we're talking about governmental involvement in social dimension measures, I think we will find that certainly in a comparison between European countries and the US and Asia, we'll see that that is the difference. The governmental involvement in these kind of measures is much higher in Europe. So I think there is a certain justification for the argument as well.
Thank you.
One factor you mentioned underlying European policies and activities is that the demographic trend in Europe with the reduced birth rate. Now, in developing countries, there are very limited economic resources and huge young populations seeking education. My question is, what relevance can we poor people get from the European example? Or none whatsoever?
I'm not sure how you use the word relevance. If you mean, though, or if you allow me, I'll slightly rephrase it, and you can tell me if I've said, or if I've kind of answered what you asked. Because I think one of the points is one of the ways that many European countries are trying to solve their problem of demographics is, of course, also through encouraging mobility. And certainly countries such as Germany are trying to now further make it easier for immigrants to come to Germany to both study and work in the labour force. So in a certain way, that's how Europe is solving the problem to a certain extent. Whether that solves your problem is another question. But if we remember, we are in Cyprus, where 50% of the students in Cyprus study outside of Cyprus. And it's very interesting because that's done as a very explicit policy here in Cyprus, because they say it would be very hard for them to otherwise support the demand for higher education areas here. Their system here can't cope with it. And they are not concerned about losing these 50% because they say many of the good people do come back. And I think that's the big challenge of trying to encourage the good people to come back, and also to just go to one of the classic justifications for mobility. You also are building networks outside of your own country, which gives you access to knowledge and resources which you otherwise wouldn't have.
I'd like to hear your reaction,
Yes,
because you are so eager to respond.
I don't quite accept the argument, as I said this morning. The brain drain just increases the gap between the rich and the poor countries. So we have really a profound global problem, which I think no one has been able to find a solution to. We just have to keep looking for a solution.
Yes.
Yes.
You've got two more people.
Okay. There is Gregory who wants to say something right now at the bottom.
Oh, okay. Yes.
That for Cyprus it took 35 years to get our Nobel Prize winner, Pissaridis, of economics, to get him back to Cyprus.
Okay.
He won the Nobel, but he's coming to Cyprus in January.
There you go. He's come back.
He will be here.
Yes, the ultimate effect is important, isn't it? Right, and there is the question from our Armenian friend.
And now it's flashing.
Now it's red. Okay. Just a little comment I just want to say about the brain drain. You know, also in the developing countries, those students who study abroad, especially in the Western universities, telling Western, I also mean like in the wide sense, like the US also included, they are more competitive when they are back their motherlands. I should mention about this. So this is another incentive to be back. You'll find a very good job in comparison with the others who studied in the local universities. So it's an incentive to be back, and we have a lot of examples of this. Thank you.
All right, there is no one single solution that would serve the purpose. All right, thank you very much for this part